It's disappointing that we've had to get to the point where we had a financial collapse, the worst financial situation of any council in the country, to get to this point. This is a situation that the ratepayers of the Central Coast are going to have to bear for a decade. It's not a quick fix, but what it does do is it sends a very clear message to what our community expect our elected officials to do, and that is to focus on the job at hand and focus on the community. It's very interesting reading the report and then the critique of the Commissioner. It's obviously also very critical of the behaviour of some of the senior officers inside Council, whether it be the CEO and a multitude of CFOs. And again, there were plenty of opportunities for this situation to have been avoided or minimised, and they failed to do so time and time again. So again, I welcome the report. I also welcome the Commissioner's responses to mandatory training for elected councillors. The only budget that wasn't blown was actually the training budget for councillors. So here's a good example where they had ample opportunity to make sure they attended the necessary education, and they failed to do so. Again, they were too busy fighting with the state government, anybody else they thought they could have a fight with, rather than delivering for the people of the Central Coast. We all remember the fiasco of Winnie Bay. We all remember that every Labor councillor voted against the Terrigal boardwalk. What they should have been doing is, rather than focusing on those sorts of fights, they should have been focusing on the financial calamity that was rolling down on them, which they failed to do time and time again. And again, I welcome the report from Commissioner McCulloch. It is concise, it is accurate, and it's that public inquiry and that transparency that the people of the Central Coast needed.
As you said there's been a real focus on training within the report. Can you tell us more about that, what that's going to look like in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. The recommendations from Commissioner McCulloch outline the fact that councillors should be undertaking a briefing and an education around the financial requirements for elected council officials. Because council financial requirements are very different to the average business requirement. And again, there seems to be either lack of will or lack of desire to understand those requirements for council's finances. So that was outlined in the Commissioner's report. In addition to that, there's also the suggestion of mandatory training for board level education. I mean, quite frankly, I would have been happy if some of these councillors could have actually read a balance sheet, because if they had, this situation could have potentially been avoided. And again, it's frustrating that the legacy that they are leaving is a decade worth of higher rates, nothing that they should be proud of.
Well,
so the 8-3 requirement is in regards to the Central Coast has been a water authority.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on that one?
I think that's an excellent recommendation. I've already spoken to the Administrator. Part of the confusion has been around the status of the Water Authority. It was covered under 2 government acts, both the Water Authority and also the Local Government Act. So again, talking to the Administrator, this is a very good recommendation for the Central Coast Council moving forward to help work with and unlock the value of that multi-billion-dollar water authority in an effective way is a good outcome. And again, the Commissioner has done her due diligence, as has the Minister, in providing these recommendations to everybody. And again, I welcome all 8 of them. I think they're excellent. The other thing we need to make really clear, which is outlined in that Commissioner's report, is that no matter how much the Labor members on the Central Coast want to carry on about this, the voluntary amalgamation of these 2 councils, both Wyong and Gosford, voted in favour of amalgamating. It was a voluntary amalgamation, had nothing to do with the financial status that we have found ourselves in. So to try and divert and deflect from the real issue here, which was the failure of the councillors to deal with the growing financial crisis, that was the real issue, and that has been outlined in the Commissioner's report. So quite frankly, I call on the Labor MPs on Central Coast to stop lying to the people of the coast about how this was the state government's fault, how this was cost shifting, how this was a forced amalgamation, because none of that is true. And the reality is the bulk of the people on the Central Coast know exactly who was responsible for this, and they will hold them accountable. And I would suspect that if these people try to run for elected office again, they will not receive the support of the community, given what has been outlined in the Commissioner's report.
So on that, so the councillors that have been sacked, can they stand again?
Yes, under the Local Government Act, they can still put themselves forward for elected office, but I would say to them, read the report.
Will the current administrator stay on until the next election?
Yes, I'm pleased to confirm that Mr Rickard has already had a meeting with the Minister for Local Government, has confirmed that he will accept the position of administrator moving forward. This morning, when the Minister sacked the councillors, effectively that removed the administrator temporarily, and a new one needs to be appointed, and Rick's already confirmed that he will stay on. And I want to acknowledge the great work that's been done by both Rick Hart and David Farmer. These people have been making the very tough, difficult decisions that the councillors should have been making back in 2018, 2019 and 2020 and failed to do so. And again, we're now bearing the brunt of their failure to deal with this financial situation, despite the fact they had multiple briefings on what was happening. We saw financial reports approved en masse without any oversight, any questioning, and all of this again is outlined in the Commissioner's report. So when we want to talk about voices of democracy, we saw these people hiding this information from the people of the Central Coast and also the New South Wales State Government until it was all too late and there was nowhere to go.
And any word on when the next election will be originally slated for September?
Yeah, look, obviously that will be done in conjunction with the Electoral Commission and the Minister. I've obviously outlined my concerns that have been relayed to me from the community. Look, quite frankly, the community want the council back on an even footing. So however long it takes for the administrator to do that job appropriately, to hand the council back to the next elected body in the best possible condition, so we can never see ourselves in this situation again, is what the people of the Central Coast actually want. Quite frankly, nobody's been banging on my door demanding that these councillors be returned. What they want is they want the council to be back in the black and being able to deliver for the community. And as we've seen, with the financial mess that was left to Rick and to David, it is going to take a long time. But I know the Minister is going to be working with the Electoral Commission to look at having an election for the Central Coast when it's appropriate to do so.
But this year?
Look, as I said, at the moment that is still open. The Minister will be talking with the Electoral Commission. My concern is the fact that there are still some very serious decisions that need to be made around the Water Authority and other big decisions that need to be done. And what we saw previously was a group of councillors that kicked every major decision down the road. They deferred, delayed, criticised everybody else, rather than actually getting on and making the tough calls. We cannot afford to have that ever happen again, because nobody on the Central Coast, no ratepayer including myself, wants to have to go through what we're going to go through for the next 10 years.
When will the community have a chance to comment on the recommendations before they're implemented?
Look, they've already been done. So the report's been tabled in Parliament. I also want to acknowledge the Minister. She has done something which isn't normally done, and she's tabled it outside of sitting, which she can do. And what that's enabled her to do is to make those decisions immediately rather than wait. So again, I want to thank Minister Tuckerman for taking the time to meet with me on multiple occasions regarding this issue. I have raised every single concern that has been brought to me with regards from our community about this issue. And I want to thank the Minister, both Ministers, both Minister Tuckerman and her predecessor, Minister Hancock, who've both acted appropriately and as quickly as possible, given the severity of this situation.
The community was promised that there'd be no fire sales of assets and no sales of environmental land. Both things have now happened, with council trying to pay down its debt. What will the New South Wales Government now do to ensure the asset sales process becomes more transparent?
Look, council have actually, the people who are saying that this has not been transparent are the ones that just didn't want it to happen at all. The reality is, when you find yourself with $500 million worth of debt, you can't just ignore it and hope that it's going to go away. So the council made the tough decision, Rick Hart and David Farrow made the tough decisions that the elected body, under former mayors, former Mayor Smith and former Mayor Matthews, failed to do. They should have been doing this years ago, and they completely ignored the situation. So the reality is that this debt has to be paid down. Council will continue. All the sales of the land have been completely transparent. They've been put online, they've been advertised, everybody has a chance to make, and a lot of properties were actually recalled. So some of the parklands, etc., were actually taken off that list based on public consultation, and that was the right thing to do. But the reality is, you've got to get the debt level down to be able to start delivering the essential services to people right across the Central Coast. You can't have your cake and eat it too, effectively.
Do you think this issue's starting to be put to bed now? With the
Look, I hope. We need to, look, this is a healing process. A lot of people are very, very angry. And I said, every time you open your rates notice, and I know I'm one of them, I'm furious about the fact that I have to keep paying for the incompetence of the elected body who failed to act. And when you read the report, which I know a lot of people will probably do, it's 91 pages, but it's very, very interesting to see how many opportunities the elected body had to potentially avoid this situation. But it's not just the elected body too. There's blame being laid at the former CEO, Gary Murphy, for not being tough enough with them, but also not outlining the severity of the financial situation, and also a revolving door of CFOs. Now, not a good situation to find yourself in when you're talking about a multi-billion-dollar entity such as Central Coast Council. You know, we had councillors saying that we should be running a deficit. You know, we had councillors that thought a 9% growth in the cost of staff was acceptable when CPI was 2.5%. That is unsustainable. And the reality is the ratepayer is now going to bear the burden of this moving forward. And again, these are all the people that stood there pontificating inside the council chambers. They were declaring climate emergencies when they weren't declaring a financial emergency. They were totally unaware, or not just unaware, but blissfully ignorant through selection, through process of what was going on, and they have failed to look after the people of the Central Coast that they were elected to do. And when we talk about transparency in government, these people have failed the test at every single level. So every time I hear about voices for the Central Coast, well, they had their chance to be their voice for the Central Coast, and they let 360,000 people down.